Today's briefing is called The Next Decade of Modernization and Security. So we thought it would a great way to start the year off by focusing on some of the core issues that are facing you. So we're going to start with a conversation and a keynote which will frame the discussion around the changing impact of technology on national security, which will be delivered here in a moment by Director Bill Evanina. We'll then get into an expert analysis on one of the most prominent kind of news features of the year and incidents of the year so far, which was this crisis we had with Iran, and actually having a discussion about what, if anything, has changed with respect to the government and private sector's threat landscape. And we're going to close out by having a captivating discussion from agency and industry leaders talking about what is it that industry can do to best support the government in its modernization and security efforts. And as always, if you've been to these things, you've heard me say this a lot, our goal is to empower you. We believe in pervasive leadership. You don't have to be a general or a CIO or an admiral or a director of NCSC to make change. All of you have the capacity to bring change to your organizations, whether you have hundreds of people reporting to you or whether you just manage your own project. So we want you to leave here feeling empowered, having actionable intelligence to work from, and go back and change the world. And we think we can do that. So with that, we're going to introduce our opening keynote. It's called the Counterintelligence Paradigm Shift, Engaging Society and National Security, which will be delivered by William R. Evanina, the director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, an organization which he has led since 2014. Now, Mr. Evanina serves as the head of counterintelligence for the U.S. government and as the principal counterintelligence and security advisor to the Director of National Intelligence. He's responsible for leading and supporting the CI and security activities of the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. government, and U.S. private sector entities at risk from intelligence collection or attack by foreign adversary. His counterintelligence security expertise is sought after by the White House, Congress, executive branch officials, private sector executives, and ICIT, of course. And I would be remiss not to mention that Bill was actually named our 2017 Pinnacle Award recipient and is a very dear friend. So please help me in welcoming Director Evanina to the stage. Thanks, buddy.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm a government employee. We need more energy. Come on, good morning. So a couple points. Thank you, Parm, for this opportunity to spend some time and partner with amazing institute you've created, I think, and really brought to bear what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. And you started this a few years ago and got a head start on what the threats really are. Secondly, as my commitment to you in sustainability, I will keep my remarks brief. I've been told to talk less and get grilled more by you on the stage, so I will do that. As before, when I go out to have engagements with audiences, I like to spend some time looking at actually who's going to be there. And I think what's exciting about this particular audience is that it's a very eclectic mix, I would call, of folks who actually protect America. You have government employees, you have government leaders, you have industry folks, you have think tanks, you have reporters, you have, I would say, a diverse environment of America. And I think my theme today is exactly that when on January 8th, the president signed the 2020 Counterintelligence Strategy for America. We get to roll that out next Monday. So I'll give you a little sneak peek today. Maybe, I'm not sure. But in that strategy, it really is, as Parm talked about, a significant paradigm shift about how we look at protecting America. And what we started with was a simple construct of changing the lexicon. Because whether you in this room, your parents, your neighbors, your children, your cousins, when you hear counterintelligence, we all think of a spy. We all think of spy versus spy. We all think of the FBI, CIA, dark alleys of Vienna, Hansen, Ames, historical spyness. If you don't think that way, then you are an advanced human being, and I congratulate you for that. But what we have here now is a lexicon change that's dire needed to be changed to move that paradigm, because what we're trying to do is slow the word down, counterintelligence, to really be countering intelligence. Counter the intelligence collection of our adversaries. Break away from just spy versus spy, because that does still exist. The insider threat still today is the #1 threat facing our nation, both inside government and outside. We had a horrible year last year in 2019 with indictments, arrests, convictions of clearance holders, as well as arrests, indictments, convictions of non-traditional collectors in the private sector. theft of intellectual property and trade secrets. It was not a good year for industry nor the government. So insider threats, very critical. So changing that paradigm is important. And why does this matter? That we have to take a look holistically across our nation. As Brian talked about the change, the technology change we face right now as a society, and then the collection that happens against us we become numb to. And we as a society don't look at what's happening every day in a nefarious fashion to us as a counterintelligence issue. When you have our main adversaries, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, stealing, sabotaging, surveilling our critical infrastructure, our ICS, our SCADA systems, going into our managed service providers, stealing our data, do we look at that as a counterintelligence issue? We are very bifurcated in industry in our thought process as to who's responsible for what. So no matter where you work, where you sit right now, ask yourselves, this is asking yourselves and answer to yourselves, who's responsible for supply chain where you work? Who's responsible for the supply chain threat in your business or industry? Is it one person? Is it a group of people? Is it an entity? Does someone have the rose pinned on them? I would venture not. Protecting your critical infrastructure in your organization. Not only your SCADA systems, your ICS systems, your IT, OT, your CIO, all the work they do, how you procure data, your printers, your fax machines, who's responsible for all that? I would proffer many people are responsible for that. We need to expand not only the accountability, but the authorities and the awareness of who's responsible for where we work, for protecting our intelligence. When you look at the PII theft that has occurred in this nation in the last decade, 98% of it from one country, People's Republic of China, we'll stipulate to that. How did they achieve this theft? Does the People's Republic of China use sophisticated counterintelligence spy tools to break into your company and get your PII? No. How do they get it? They've always gotten it one way. 95% of all breaches that have occurred in the last 10 years have occurred from successful spearfish. Because as Americans, we have an incredible inability to not click a link. We just can't not do it. And they understand that. And they use that against us, our open society. And we could talk about the open society that makes us the best nation in the history of the world. We could talk about that infinitum. But that also makes us very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, whether it's in academia, research development, or wherever you work and what you provide. So why should we care? Should we care about our adversaries, Russia and China, being able to disrupt our natural gas and oil pipelines at will? We heard last year in the ATA by Director Coates, the ability for adversaries to do that. Is that an issue that's owned by the pipeline company, by DHS? Do we own that when we don't have heat next week? Electricity? We all own that. We're all victims of that. When you have the APT-10 issue with the People's Republic of China and the penetrations in the managed service provider and our data that's stolen, your data that's stolen, that's trusted by the organizations that you provided to, whether it be your insurance, your travel information, your banking information, your healthcare information, that is now all in the possession of the People's Republic of China? Is that a counterintelligence problem? Is that just the FBI's problem, the government's problem? No. It's a data problem. You know, we want to have it both ways in America. We want to have our privacy, but yet we don't seem to be alarmed when other countries steal that data that we seek to have private. It's confusing. We just had an issue with Iran, as we all know. Does your company, your entity, believe that the retaliation is over? And if not, what is your company doing to protect it? Have we remembered what happened less than a decade ago with DDoS attacks, what the Iranians are capable of doing? Are your organizations prepared for entities like Iran to conduct cyber operations on our soil in your business? Or do we just think that happened a long time ago, it's not going to happen again? With Russia, we see articles all the time, you hear government assessments all the time about their ability to conduct surveillance of our critical infrastructure, our gas, natural gas, oil, electrical grids, We forget back in 2015, the FBI arrested a couple SVR individuals in New York City surveilling our financial system. But they're just blips on the radar screen. And we need America to put all these blips together. Looking at the issues that we have in an aggregate fashion to make it a counterintelligence or a security issue. If you have a supply chain threat or a supply chain attack in your company, your CIO, maybe your CISO, your procurement officer will be called in to talk about what happened. If it's a nation-state threat actor who stole that data or penetrated your systems, is that a counterintelligence issue? I think it is. We haven't seen a whole likes of the adversary versus adversary, U.S. company versus U.S. company, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. We really don't go there anymore, right? We're pretty set in our amazing country based upon rules and values, norms. That is not the case with our adversaries. The People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation, Iran, they don't have a bifurcation of government, private sector, and the criminal element like we do. They're all the same. They work for one. If you have not read or seen the new cybersecurity law, the national security law, put forth by the People's Republic of China on November 1st, you should read it. What it means to all Chinese businesses inside of China, outside of China, and all Chinese citizens inside of China and outside of China. What they're responsible for and accountable for to the Ministry of State Security and Intelligence Services within China. We see what's going on with Russia. Think about Russia's capabilities of election interference. Do we think that we're going to take this election cycle off and say, you know, we're good? I don't think so. Do we believe that any other countries have looked at that as a viable tool to use in their? Sure they can. And it's not just the big elections, it's all elections, state and locals. We understand that. Let me vector back to supply chain for a second. Let's think about the complexity. As Parm put out, the complexity of counterintelligence. When we have our ability, let's say healthcare, banking, financial services, they own our data. And they employ the ability with another company to store that data in the cloud. The cloud is then breached by a nation-state threat actor. Your data is now breached. Are you blaming your bank or are you blaming the cloud service provider? Where we are not up to speed with technology is third-party data sharing agreements, the legality and the accountability of that data. If you look at some of the organizations recently that have been breached, paying out hundreds and millions of dollars of damages. It's a new area for the legal world. Folks in law school now, if they get into third-party data sharing, are going to make a lot of money in the next 10 years. Privacy is a big deal. We cherish that privacy here in the US. But sometimes when our data is stolen, we don't. The last two things I want to talk about is the insider threat. We talked a little bit about spear phishing and the success our adversaries have there. Just an amazing statistic. Recent studies have shown that 78% of industry CISOs have admitted to clicking on a link they haven't validated. Wow, that's crazy, right? That's just crazy. Out of the 250 US companies in the US, recent studies have shown only 34% of them have a valid insider threat program. But yet we see constantly insider threats damaging our intellectual property and trade secrets. It becomes numb. Sometimes it doesn't even get in the newspaper. With all the noise we have going on politically, when you have a big company that's breached, there's an arrest, there's an indictment, whether it be in an industry organization or in academia like last week in Harvard, it has about a 7-minute news cycle. We had last year a US clearance holder, former Intel organization individual, arrested, charged, and pled guilty for spying on behalf of China. His name was Hansen. And you remember the first Hansen? Right? You would think the second Hansel would be big news. I think it made the Des Moines Register. To me, we are getting numb to what is happening to us with respect to the countering of intelligence by our foreign nations. Hence, as the new strategy gets rolled out on Monday, we are going to then take a look at a whole-of-nation approach, a whole-of-society approach to defending what we believe are true to our values, our laws, our morals, what we believe to be true about the fundamental nature of our country. From election security to foreign influence, to economic security, critical. We are going to look at everything and say it's no longer a government just issue. It's everyone's issue. And look at this as a long-term solution problem to nation-state threats that hold us accountable every day and have a long-term plan to infiltrate our nation and violate and potentially harm the republic which we become so successfully as one of the greatest nations ever. With that, I'm going to invite Parm to have further questions. Thank you.
Am I on? Okay, great. So Bill, thanks so much as always. Fascinating comments. I think the first thing I want to talk about is, as you mentioned, I think there's a lot of folks in this room where it may be their first time that they're thinking about their role as it relates to national security. What are some, what do we need to do to ensure that this message, you talked about the short news cycle, what do we need to do to ensure that this message is getting out there, that they're able to communicate what you just said within their organization and to their supply chains?
I think the hard part is messaging, Parm. I think we have to, unlike terrorism, where you have an event, people die, we have funerals, we feel the pain. This new threat vector, and it's not new, the awareness of the supply chain threat, critical infrastructure, we have not felt the pain yet, right? And I don't want to get to a place where we have, as someone in the intelligence community would say, the cyber 9/11, or the heat goes off in 3 cities in January. I don't want to get to that point. I want to get to a point where we understand the criticality of that. We've spent a lot of time with CEOs talking about the risk equation of threat plus vulnerability equals consequence. Well, the CEOs own that consequence. The shareholders own that consequence, the board of directors. We are making an effort. It's slow but sure to be able to understand what that is. But unfortunately, when you have this close to $500 billion of theft, some of it, well, companies keep going and making a profit. Our economy is booming. So the pain threshold isn't there right now. But I think we have to make sure that every American understands the existential threat from other nations. But where does that come from? Right? Yeah. We look at the millennials right now. Where do they see their news? Where do they watch their news? Right? It's not on CNN or Fox. No. It's on the internet. It's on different types of social media. The government is not predicated for that. No. The government is set in 1988.
So are there with respect to the supply chain specifically, are you seeing enough, organization or programs on the part of companies who are trying to reach out to their, up and down their supply chain to change this? I know the large companies, like the Ciscos of the world, have dedicated offices about supply chain security, but how many Ciscos are there?
Correct. And I think it's going to be a trickle down. I think you're going to see some success, and we have seen some movement with the Department of Defense and with the deliver on compromise concept, with adding security as part of the procurement process. And I think when you look at that and DoD starts to mandate security being part of their procurement with their defense industrial base, that will trickle down to suppliers. And I think that's going to, just like we have with insider threat programs, not as successfully, but I think with the supply chain mindset, as we continue to drive, we see the threat, we see the penetrations of third-party vendors from foreign nation states. We just don't do a good job of communicating that to those who need it. But I think DoD will start the trend on that.
Interesting. So it seems like, as per your remarks, the government now has kind of a dual role in defending the nation and supporting private sector and counterintelligence. What is the government, I know this report's coming out on Monday, what are some kind of next steps that is happening or should be happening in your opinion?
So I think the next steps are going to be dramatic, and I say this in a hopeful fashion. And when you look at the way the government is set up, the intelligence community versus those who, work with industry, it's kind of bifurcated. DHS owns a lot of the space with industry, especially with the sectors that are involved in that. The intelligence community is reliant about collecting information that transfer that intelligence to DHS, to Department of Energy, to Treasury, through existing ISACs. I think that we're going to have to take a look at that paradigm and maybe amp up our game. And I think right now the intelligence community is going to be forced and it's probably late for this, to look at the private sector as a constituent of the information we collect. We haven't necessarily done that, and I think some of my brother and sister agencies will probably not be happy with me saying this, but we have to, as a nation, be able to understand the criticality of collecting intelligence from our adversaries and of their intent and capability, and making sure that it becomes actionable in real time to industry so they can help protect. The government doesn't make anything. We just buy it from industry. We have to do a better job of protecting industry, and the industry is going to have to make the government more accountable and hold us to what we want to do.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things you mentioned in your talks is insider threats. I know you've talked about this for a long time. We've published about this for a number of years. I'm wondering, what guidance do you have for the folks in the room, whether they're government or private sector, to kind of assess how robust their insider threat program is, and then basically be able to take action to improve it based on their assessment?
Well, it's a good question. It's a long answer, but I'm going to try and split it in two parts. I think first, we have to be honest with ourselves. Do we have an insider threat program? I think the last 5 years you've seen such an influx and increase in the problem set of insider threats, both in government and out. And I think in the industry side, last year was a watershed year. Is that because industry is reporting more of these insiders, or because there are more insiders? And I think it's the chicken and egg equation. Also, with the lack of insider threat programs in industry shows that if we doubled that, we would have more cases, and I don't know if we have that many more FBIs to do all the investigations, right?
Yeah.
But the theft is astronomical when we talk about the number and the dollar value and the ideas and the thoughts and the technology going out the window. I would proffer that I think as we drive a new strategy, I think CEOs and board of directors have to mandate a fundamental enterprise-wide security construct. And what do I mean by that? The security of your company can no longer just rest at the feet of the CISO and the CSO. It now has to include the CIO, the chief data officer, the chief privacy officer, the general counsel, the head of human resources, the head of procurement and acquisition. And I would proffer at least once a quarter, get all those folks in a room in one building, and it's going to cost you a pot of coffee, and talk about the threat that we face as a company. And then when that meeting, you have to identify and be honest. What are the 3 things that you do that other people want? And are we doing everything in our power to protect them? And then once you decide those 3 things, protect them. Increase your spending on security, protect them, and then have a policy of that protection, share with your employees, and get everyone involved in protecting those 3 things, those 5 things, whatever that is, and then communicate to your board of directors and your shareholders, and most importantly, your employees, so then you have a rah-rah moment. We're all in this together to protect the things that other people want. And I say other people, other nations. Yeah. And I think we haven't yet done that, and I think we have too much of a mindset in America where, we're going to just put in a pilferage rate, No, we don't have to do that. And we are still the land of awesomeness. We make amazing things. We have to do a better job of protecting it. And it can't just be the old guns, gates, badges, and the person who's in charge of making sure our computers work. It has to be a wider net of understanding. And that goes to your question about the head of human resources. We need to know who we're hiring. Yeah. And we need to put a value set on that hiring and make sure that head of human resources understands that they are a critical part of the process of protecting whatever you make in your industry, your corporation, your university, or your government organization.
Well, it's funny, we talk about these things at the Institute.
It's not funny, it's serious.
We talk about things at the Institute. One of the things we always talk about then is, this is more of an observation, is then how do you incentivize? So I think right now, folks are just laser focused on, end of the day, I have a job, I have a scope of work, and when bonus time comes around, or in the private sector particularly, or review time comes around, if I don't see security written into my job description, I'm not really going to care about that meeting they want me to go to, because I have to do my job to get my bonus. And I think HR is a really undervalued piece of this equation, because ultimately people have jobs to do, they get paid to do a certain thing, and now you have kind of this nebulous new responsibility out there that's not being mandated in their job description. I think we have to get those HR folks involved. I think that's a really, really important piece.
They're a critical part of everything that we do in America. Again, and I think it's an old entity within business, in academia, and the government. We tend to undervalue it, but it is a critical component of what we're going to need to do to make everything protected in our nature, and that includes hiring the right people for the right reasons in the right spaces, and then protecting it. And I think we just need to make sure that the head of human resources, and to your point about incentivizing, it starts at the top. It starts with the CEO, it starts with the president of the university, it starts with the government director, making sure that all of this is looked at as an enterprise-wide security, starting with the human resources head.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we have 10 minutes, and Bill has to leave on the dot when we're done. He's going to run out the door. He has an important meeting. So thank you for still being here this morning. We appreciate it. I want to pause for a moment. I have a couple more questions. Are there any questions from the audience for Bill? Any comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Jackson Barnett with FedScoop.
Good morning, Jackson.
Could you speak to how you're using emerging technology like machine learning, artificial intelligence, both as a defense and also planning for that used by the adversary as an offensive tool?
Yes. Well, I'll start by saying, to preface, offensively, the men and women of the intelligence community and Department of Defense are doing a phenomenal job. I mean, we are doing things now that we dreamed about 5 years ago, and we are using emerging technologies and AI and other capabilities that are just you see in movies. So on the offensive side, I think that's true. On the defensive side, we're trying, right? Because the technology changes so fast. Each agency in the intelligence community and DoD has their own AI, ML groups. Again, it's the government, so procurement gets involved, and that takes, between 13 and 17 years, right? Get that? But I think where it's more important is in industry. I think we have to understand that the emerging technology and the ideas and the research and the great tools are in industry. I think the government has to be able to be more open to take off-the-shelf work and success in industry to use it in the government, and we're not quite there yet.
Did I see another hand? Oh, several. Yes, you, sir?
Good morning.
You mentioned supply-side protection and contracting. How do you envision this being accomplished?
So multiple.
I want to lean forward and make sure it's in my new action.
Yes, sir. And this is something that I'm really adamant about, have been in my job the last couple of years, is first of all, awareness. For the NSF to be just even aware, and I've talked to your director about this, aware that the people who procure are part of the protection apparatus of the NSF. Which that means is that you have to understand who would want to be doing harm. So when you have a solicitation out, where is that solicitation? What websites are on? Who's looking at it? It's a free software. And then understand that you need at least an hour of a year of training. If we train every procurement officer, acquisition person, just for 1 hour of the basic threats that are out there and how you as a procurement official can protect your company, your organization, we will be light years ahead of where we are now. And I think that when you have just the awareness in the procurement acquisition field, who are the least trained in any kind of intelligence or counterintelligence world, we will be light years ahead. And I think that starts with training and awareness and a commitment from the top of the organization that procurement will be part of the enterprise-wide protection of what we do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir. And then you.
So, thank you, Bill. Eric Ricard, Certainty Federal Systems. If there was a commercial technology that could absolutely defeat digital espionage, who in your organization would want to know about it?
So I think from my perspectives of being head of the countries, I would want to make sure that it's scalable, and that so we have not only the intelligence community but non-Title 50s that would want to use that, right? So data, Department of Education has a lot of data that our adversaries want. So I would say that 2 organizations, one would be the ODNI, 2 would be General Services Administration, and the federal CIO would want to.
Specifically within the
Oh, yeah. If I had mentioned names, I would get hate mail tomorrow. So,
Yeah.
but
Thank
I
you.
would say NCSC, not necessarily for the technology, but we would be the ones that would market and sell that, the value of that technology. But I think where they can be promulgated and scalable will be DHS, Federal CIO, and ODNI.
Yes, ma'am?
Sure.
How do security clearances play in HR's role within the vetting process?
Great question. And that's a 3-hour answer, but I'll give it a one answer. So we just came out with this Trust the Workforce 2.0, which really is going to revitalize, or it is revitalizing the security clearance process. And what we've done historically since the 40s, we've had a human resources process and a security clearance process. You would go through this first, and then it would be thrown over the fence and security. We are merging those together now. So that'll be done at the same time, because what we found is when we did security clearance, we were asking the same questions we did when we hired people. So we're merging them together, and that just gets rolled out probably in a week or two. That will minimize the ability. It would also take human resources and understand the complexity of security. I think that's going to be a really great construct for the first time ever, where you have what's called suitability and security working together.
Don?
Don McLean, DLT. Just so you know,
Good morning.
I'm not a Chinese spy. And my question is, how do you see the CMMC requirements, which were just released, playing out? And do you think that DHS or civilians should adopt a similar approach?
So it's, again, very complicated question. I think it's going to take some time for regulation and policy to catch up. So just because you have, yes, I'm going to say, let's wait for policy. So every time something comes new, there's policy that catch up, and that policy catch up could be 6 months to 4 or 5 years. So in the government, I think that we'll see that change happen slowly. But I think, to my point earlier in my speech, the attorneys who are in the space are going to have a lot of work to do. Good question.
All right, yeah.
One more?
Earlier in your discussion, you mentioned, I'm sorry, Evan Arts from Pacific Northwest National Lab.
Good morning.
Earlier in your discussion, you mentioned that the IC needs to look to expand its customer base to include the commercial sector. What about the flip side of that coin and the commercial sector actually being or providing data, threat data, to the federal government so that they can help protect also? And then, with respect to policy, where are we on the policy, and how far in advance do you think, or how long is it going to take before we have policies that are in place that allow the commercial sector to provide that type of data without any barriers?
So I'm going to move along to a question that's not so well thought out. So it's a little complicated, and I think you should correct on everything you said. And we are in the process, a long process, with not only policy reality, policy not reality, of accepting that information. And you'll have a lot of attorneys in the government who'll say, well, if we took your information, it would provide you a competitive advantage. That drives me crazy, because I believe that just like insider threat companies, you know, I have contractors that work for me. Their companies have insider threat programs. I should have the information in that program that could help me identify whether or not they're a trusted employee. The national labs, industry, the banking community, the people that do ML and AI, the people that have cyber capabilities to help the U.S. government, we don't have the capability, the regulatory process to accept that information. And until we do, we are not going to get to the equilibrium where we are. I concur with you, and I just think that the government needs to be more forward-leaning and forward-thinking about regulatory and policy change to allow that. Where it's going to win is if it's a consortium. If DOE particularly has a consortium of 8 labs that provide information into one, and then we can take it, that's more viable. But from lab to lab, company to company, you know, we're not going to get J.P. Morgan cyber information in the U.S. government. People look at that as being not so kosher. I agree with you. We just have to find more creative ways to do it.
So, and that brings us to we have 1 minute left, so I want you, Bill, if you don't mind closing. We covered a lot of important issues. The problem is so large. What is kind of the most important thing you want folks to walk away from that can be maybe actionable of what they can do to address some of these issues?
First, a cheap shout out for ncsc.gov. So on our website, it's a forward-leaning private sector work site where we have tools and capabilities for insider threat programs, baseline, best practices, and then maturity models. We also have supply chain best practices. We also have know the risk, raise your shield with understanding mobile protection. One of the things that we do in America poorly is protect our mobile devices and our cell phones, understanding the threats. So A, hit the website. And there are other capabilities to go out there and do that, be aware of the threats that we face. Secondly, have confidence. As we go through this election cycle, we can do nothing more than make sure that we get to all of our constituents and make sure that we vote. We have to vote. We have to make sure that you put pressure on the government to ensure our electoral process, our machines are working properly, and that we have the ability to understand that our republic resides in the fact that we could provide free and open elections. Secondly, and I'd say third, and last, if you know someone in the intelligence community, the military, thank them, because we are doing amazing work offensively to be able to provide an optic to show how complicated the threat is we face from the nations. And if you walk out of here with one thing, walk out of here with understanding that it's a very complicated, diverse set of threats that we face. This landscape is like nothing we've ever done. And for the first time, the government is actually being honest about it.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to start by thanking you for being here today, Bill. We appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.